Thanks, you too.
Everyone got quiet. Feel like
Everyone was quiet when I got on.
Good morning.
See if this is gonna work. Ah, yeah, it does. Okay, good deal. How is everyone?
I'm good.
Carmen's back.
Been about a month.
Yeah. Well, Sue can't make it because she has PT, and Lori can't make it because they are packing up, and her husband said or has a few interviews. And so if you can be praying for them. And she said that she's hoping because her daughter is in Houston and that he has an interview there. They're praying for God's will, but that sure would be nice, wouldn't it? So let's just pray for that.
Amen.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. So we'll just pray for that too. Okay, so today I'm doing a Sunday school lesson. It is not going to be normal. I cheated again and have my husband's notes. So you get his Sunday school lesson with my voice. So basically, I told him that I said, don't you have something about the Kings? Because I really would just like to do an overview of the Kings, but I don't really want to do the work. And so I have just been so busy, and it's just like, I felt like that was going to drain me. And he found it on his computer. So praise the Lord, it wasn't written, and he was able to find it very quickly. And so this is just going to take everything that we've been reading the past month pretty much, and we're going to read in the First and Second Chronicles, and it's kind of compiling it so we can look at the good, the bad, and the ugly kings, and just kind of basically it's just kind of like a Cliff's Notes version of the Kings. And so
A Cliff Note. Oh,
you hate them?
Those, no, I said I love me a Cliff Note. Are you kidding? Those were a godsend.
No
Like,
kidding.
straight up, the best thing ever.
Yeah, that's how I passed high school. So read a book? No. What do you Cliff Notes? Yeah. Yeah, but I didn't know with it being a teacher if you were like,
Well, when I was in school, that's what irritated me was our friends that were taking AP had the exact same curriculum we did and got an extra point. So in my head, Cliff Notes was we all had snack together, and they would tell us what was going on because they're like, it's not fair that we get an extra point. So we decided we're going to be your Cliff Notes. We're not going to tell you everything, but we're going to give you an abridged version so you're not taking. I was like, well, I'm down with that. That seems quite fair. Let's discuss, you know. But yeah, sometimes a good old Cliff Notes, there is not a gosh darn thing. Or I liked them when you'd read something and you didn't really understand it. Then you brought that in and go, oh, that's what it meant. Okay, cool, thanks. Because you couldn't exactly just dial up the author and say, yeah, hey, in chapter 3, page 72, I don't really understand what you meant with that, you know, paragraph there. Could you explain that? So Cliff Notes are fantastic.
awesome. Yeah. Okay, so I guess we will get started. Does somebody want to pray us in? Okay, I will. I don't mind. You're going to hear my voice for the next like 30 minutes. So just throw that out there. Okay, Lord, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you so much for this time together, Lord, to just be able to just get away from everything and just dive into your word. And Lord, we just pray as we read about these kings that you appointed, Lord, that we can see that you are the true King of Kings, Lord, that we have you and you are the perfect King. And Lord, we know that kings are just mere men, but you are God. And Lord, we just thank you. We thank you that as we read about all of these mistakes and the good, the bad, and the ugly things that they did, Lord, that we can see that your hand was still in it. And Lord, no matter what we're going through right now, we just pray that we will just see your hand in it as well. We especially pray for Sue, for her PT, Lord, and that she will continually to heal. And especially for Lori and her husband, as they are in the midst of just waiting on your hand, Lord, we do pray for favor. And if possible, it'd be awesome if he got Houston to be near their daughter, Lord, and her family, Lord. And Lord, we know that we can ask these requests and we can lay them at your feet, knowing that your will be done. Lord, we just thank you for all that you are and all that you do. And we thank you so much for your word and that you gave it to us for a purpose, and let us be able to just dwell in it and let it just be in our hearts and our minds, Lord, as we go throughout this week and throughout this lesson. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we are going to start. And I thought this was really cool. So I don't know about y'all, but ooh, my hair is lovely. How many of y'all get confused with the kingdoms? I know I sure do. And so when I read this, I was like, man, I needed this like last month. So basically First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles can be very confusing. Sometimes the kings of Judah and Israel had the same names as each other. And many times one king was known by two different names. What is more, the books have different focuses. Whereas Kings tells us of both Judah and Israel, Chronicles focuses only on Judah, which I thought was really interesting. Furthermore, Chronicles seems to be more God-centered than Kings. It includes more prayers and ascribed religious motives to events which are not elaborated upon or which are explained differently in Kings. And I know doing Kings, there's a lot of times I had to go to Chronicles to make sense of the stories, because Chronicles definitely digs deeper into what's going on. And Ezra wrote Chronicles, which I thought was really interesting. You gotta love Ezra. I love him. But he wrote that, so he is definitely coming from. I was always told that Kings is from man's perspective, but Chronicles is from God's perspective, is what I've always been told. So the United Kingdom was Saul, David, and Solomon. So Saul has kingdom taken from him and by Samuel the prophet, and then David unites kingdoms again. Nathan was the prophet then, and then Solomon builds the temple, and he's the son, of course, of David and Bathsheba. And so that was like what God's intentions was. And then came terribleness. And Saul, David, and Solomon ruled over all 12 tribes of Israel. And then when Solomon died, the kingdom split into two. The northern half consisted of 10 tribes and was ruled by Jeroboam, son of Nebat. It is referred to as Israel, Ephraim, or Samaria. The southern half consisted of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and was ruled over by Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. It is referred to as Judah, Jerusalem, or Zion. So after the death of King Solomon, the united tribes of Israel split into two kingdoms. The southern kingdom of Judah, with the capital remaining at Jerusalem, and the northern kingdom of Israel, with the capital at Samaria. The northern kingdom lasted just over 200 years before they were conquered and taken away into exile by the Assyrians. They never returned and have become known to history as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom lasted slightly over 300 years before they were conquered and taken into exile by the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar, which I called King Neb. So if you ever see Neb, that's who I call. I feel like me and Neb can be like this sometimes. I joked all the time when I was pregnant with Faith, if we had a boy, we were going to call him Nebuchadnezzar, so we can call him Neb in short. No one thought that was like funny, but I was like, that would be awesome, you know? Imagine him going
I
into
think that is rad, and
that name.
you need to rename Faith and tell her new nickname is Neb, and it'll just be a family joke, and it'll be cute. But I think you should roll with the full, like if she's in trouble, Nebuchadnezzar, get in the room.
Yeah, so I don't know. I just think that's a really fun roll off the tongue kind of name, Nebuchadnezzar. And so we always have to remember King Nebuchadnezzar, he is Daniel. I mean, that's what I always think of. He is led by Daniel. So we have to remember that. So unlike the northern kingdom, however, a remnant of the southern kingdom was allowed to return and resettle Jerusalem in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah after the Babylonians were themselves conquered by the Persians under Cyrus the Great. Their descendants are known as the Jews of today. That's a little history of all of that. You know, my husband really likes all this stuff, so he always looks into all of that. I just thought that was really cool. And again, we're going to read all that. Ezra and Nehemiah are like amazing books. I mean, they are just, I cannot begin to, the excitement to go over them are going to be so fun because they're so good. Okay. So, and we're going to see all of it come together. And I feel like those are just such a good books to see everything come together. Okay, so the Bible takes a very blunt view in assessing the characters of the various kings as either good or bad, dependent entirely on their relationship with God, and therefore the way the Hebrew faith was worked out in the countries they ruled. Rather than taking account of political achievements, etc., it is apparent that the character of the king always had a strong influence of the character of the country. And we see that still to this day. There's nothing new under the sun. And we saw throughout First and Second Kings, all throughout how if there's a good king, it's because he relied on the Lord. If he was a bad king, it's because he relied on himself. And so again, we learn from that. And I wish our rulers would see that and see that, the Bible has a reason why it says the things that it does. And there's a reason for it. So, okay, y'all, full force. We're going to go into this. Does anybody have any questions before I go in? Okay. I told my husband that this is weird for me because I really like interaction. So his lessons are always hard for me because he doesn't have much interaction. And so interrupt me at any time. Feel free. Okay. So Rehoboam, we remember he's Judah. So remember what I just said. We had Saul, David, Solomon, and then here comes Rehoboam to Judah. So we're going to go over the Judah. Where is? Okay. Rehoboam, he was in 1 Kings 12 and 14, and his length of reign was 17 years. The dates were 930 to 913, and he was bad. So we see in 925 BC, Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt attacked Jerusalem and took all the temple treasures. Solomon's son Rehoboam inherited the throne, but rejected the advice of Solomon's counselors and treated the people harshly when they sent Jeroboam to negotiate for better treatment, hence the rebellion. Shemaiah prophesied that Rehoboam should not fight Rehoboam should not fight Jeroboam. Rehoboam adopted pagan religion wholesale. So that's your first really bad king. Solomon, I should have looked up in Chronicles what they say about him. He definitely turned away from God, but he also wrote, Ecclesiastes, which is nothing new under the sun. So I'm excited to go over him in Chronicles to kind of see if my assessment of him is different, because I'm not a really huge fan of him because he turned away from God. But he was just so I don't know. I don't remember if they say if he's bad or not. And so that was Judah. And then we have Israel, which is Jeroboam. And Jeroboam is 1 King 12:25 through 14:20. So you see that we go Rehoboam to Jeroboam, we've read about, and his reign was 22 years. He was 930 to 909, and he was bad. Jeroboam was an official in Solomon's government when Ahijah prophesied that he would rule 10 tribes, promising an enduring dynasty if he would be faithful to God. Instead, when he became king, he set up golden calves in Bethel and Dan and appointed priests from all the tribes. The man of God from Judah prophesied that King Josiah would one day bring an end to pagan worship, and Ahijah prophesied an imminent end to Jeroboam's line. So then we have Abijah, and he was Judah. In 1 Kings 15, 1 through 8, 3 years, 913 to 910, and he was bad. Continual war against Jeroboam and take some of Israel's towns. So he just kind of continued the badness. And then we see Asa. And I don't know about y'all, but whenever I see some good kings, it's so refreshing. Does anybody get that? It's oh, finally a good guy. It's you see bad, and you're and then you see good, you're yay, this is so good. Asa was Judah. And so we're seeing, so far we have 2 bad Judahs, 1 bad Israel, because I would love to know. Well, I'll ask that at the end. Asa is 1 Kings 15, 9 through 24, 41 years, 910 through 869, and he was good. the Reformation. I don't know if y'all remember that, but it was really cool with Asa. Asa destroyed the artifacts of pagan religion, right down to the removal of the queen mother who had made an Asherah pole. He takes away sodomites, male religious prostitutes, and he wars with Ethiopians and wins after crying out to God. But when Baasha, king of Israel, comes against him, he sends the recently restored gold and silver from the temple to Ben-Hadad of Aram, which is Syria, persuading him to break his treaty with Israel and align with Judah instead. Ben-Hadad attacks Israel. Hananiah, the seer, tells Asa that because he relied on the king of Syria and not God, he will henceforth have wars. Again, this is like, he still is good though, but I mean, it's like, I don't know what I'd have done in his position, I don't know, because it's like that you want to rely on God for everything, right? But sometimes we also want to rely on other people and make them above God and say, well, I mean, it's easy to, especially, I have no idea what it would be like to be a king in this time, and to see all of that. And you have more than just yourself, you have other people and you have your whole kingdom to worry about and to think about. So, but he was still good. He still was good in the Lord's eyes and everything. He just had that one fault. I don't know. What would y'all have done? I mean, you have like this attack coming and, would you say, I mean, come on, help? Or would you say, okay, Lord, I'm going to rely on you?
I think that's it. It seems like it's like a circle that goes around and around with like a lesson to where it's like, okay, if I rely on God, then he blesses me. But then if I don't rely on God, I learn that I have to rely on God for him to bless me. So it's like this like continuous circle of same thing. Or it's like they put the bad kings in the Bible, I think, to also kind of show how good the good ones were, kind of like contrasting. Making it super educational today. But like just even from a literary standpoint, it's like you don't understand how good the good is unless you have it contrasted against how bad the bad is. So it's like, it seems like that's that and the underlying lesson of how hard it is to fully rely on God. Like you said, oh, I see the myriad of soldiers in the distance. Instinct is going to be, all right, boys, let's go. And, on the other hand, it's supposed to be, okay, you got this, and it's like this awkward cricket silence, but it's like, you don't know what the lesson is. I think that's kind of the overarching thing too, is we can see what the lesson is because we're reading it after the fact. Yeah. People that are in it don't see it. So it's that's kind of too, like when you're in, like, to me, like you were saying earlier about being busy, the way to describe this week is, y'all remember Gumby? I feel like Gumby this week, and having each person pulling a different portion of me in a different direction at the same time as one person. But then I realize in hindsight now, there's been a few days, oh, God's growing me. Okay, got it. Let's keep going. So like I said, I think it's like, that's one thing interesting when we're reading the Bible. It's like, oh, okay, what an awful season this person is in and why they're going through. Oh, okay, it's because he needed to fully rely on God, not just say it, but do it. Okay, that makes sense.
Anybody else have anything?
I'm glad that we have these reminders, because it seems to me that every time the king relied on himself, got into trouble. Anytime he relied on God, God would give him or tell him what was going, this is what's going to happen. You will be victorious here. Yes, go after this king, or no, don't go after this king. And they could have really have said, should we give the king all this gold and silver? And God would have, answered them one way or the other. Yes, no, whatever, go into battle, or, just wake up tomorrow and they're all dead, Yeah. So it's like, I needed this. So I printed out something that had all the kings. And then as I started halfway through writing like a little arrow because they were bad, an up arrow if they were a good king. And then I started noticing, like, if, it said they did right in the eyes of God, it usually meant that they did not put a false God above, our God, they're not relying on false gods either, which we can put ourselves as a false God. So I think it's really, it's a huge reminder. Stop, pray, So that's how I saw it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
I saw it. We got to remember they're humans. I mean, even though they believe God and everything, it's just like us. We have our times, we do dumb things.
Amen. Yeah. It's so true, Ruth. And that's what I think I wrote that in the notes today that I copied, or last night whenever I was updating the post for next week. That is such an important thing. And I think that that's what is so reminded in all this, because they are human. Like, and again, it's like so interesting. Okay. So Nadab is from 1 Kings 15:25-31. He reigned for 2 years and he was bad. Killed after 2 years by Baasha while the Israelite army was besieging a Philistine town. It was short and evil in an evil reign. And then Baasha took over because he just killed Nadab, and he reigned for 24 years and he was bad. He slaughtered all of Jeroboam's relations, including Nadab, in accordance with Abijah's prophecy. Jehu prophesied that the same thing would happen to Baasha's family, and he wars with Asa, king of Judah. And then Elah came and he reigned for 2 years. He was bad, killed after 2 years of Zimri, and an official in charge of half of Israel's chariots while Elah was drunk. And then Zimra, these are all Israel. Sorry, these are all Israel kings. Zimra, he reigned for 7 days. I think he has the shortest reign, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he holds the reign for the shortest days. So that's not really one that you'd want, but that's what he got. And he was bad, slaughtered all of Baasha's relations, including Elah, in accordance with Jehu's prophecy. Within a week of becoming king, Israel rebelled against him, committed suicide by burning the palace down around him. So basically his 7-day reign, like, he did a lot of damage. And then Tibni, he reigned for 5 years, and his reign overlapped with Omri, but Omri's followers proved stronger and Tibni died. So Omri took over and he reigned for 12 years and he was bad. He became king despite Tibni's challenge. Halfway through his reign, bought the hill of Samaria, built a city there, and established it as the new capital of Northern Kingdom. Took Israel to new depths of depravity. So again, these are not things I would want to be known for, but these are what they are, and that's what they did. So Ahab, 22 years, and he was bad. So Israel again, this is Israel, and a yet worse king than his father Omri. Ahab was led into Baal worship by his Phoenician wife Jezebel. Jezebel is so horrible. She is just so horrible. And God's response was to send Elijah, who predicted or perhaps even caused 3.5 years of drought, which ended after his successful duel with the priest of Baal on Mount Carmel. Elijah then recruited and trained his successor Elisha, and Ben-Hadad of Aram attacked Samaria. Ahab conceded to his first set of demands, but not a subsequent set. Israel won the ensuing battle and a subsequent one a year later. After having Naboth killed so he could seize his vineyard, Ahab is confronted once again by Elijah and finally repents, postponing the disaster that God had planned for Israel. Ahab disguises himself when he goes into battle for Ramoth Gilead, and he is randomly shot with a bow and dies. Again, this is just an overview of everything we've read condensed all together. And so that we talked about Elijah last week. I think it was last week. I would highly recommend going back on listening to that if you didn't, because it was a really good lesson. Jehoshaphat, we're back in Judah, and he reigned for 25 years, and he was good, a good king who compromised by allying himself with Ahab to fight the Arameans at Ramoth Gilead. And despite many false prophets predicting success in the battle, Micaiah correctly predicted that Ahab would be killed, and he does this, which is right in the eyes of the Lord, making reforms after praying for God's assistance when he has victory over Moab and Ammon. And if there is a character in the Old Testament, that is Micaiah. I am so him. He has nothing good to say. He's sarcastic. everything about him and me are one of the same. So if I could like say if I am a character, it is totally him, because he just comes in and he's so sarcastic and he's like, yeah, I'll just tell you what you want to hear. And then they're like, see, that's why I hate him, because he never says anything good. And he's like, you know, and so it's just, I can totally see that. Like, I'm like, yes. And so I love him. If you did not read that story, you should go back and read it, because he's pretty phenomenal. I like him a lot. And then, so, and what he predicted came true, even though they said it wasn't going to. And so Micaiah I am one of the same with him. When we get to heaven, like, I'm going to be like we are one of the same. Okay. So Ahaziah, and he is, I have to remember. Okay, he's Israel, and 2 years, and he's bad. And he fell through a lattice roof and injured himself, sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, to see if he would recover. But Elijah met them and correctly predicted his death. He dies without an heir. Without this time, Elijah was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, and Elisha succeeded him and pulled a great trick involving a bear and 42 ewes. And we all read that. That was really cool. But again, I think the problem, like the thing with this is I focus more on Elijah and Elisha during this time than on the king. And so that's why this was kind of good for me, because I was like, oh, I kind of forgot about him because I'm too focused on Elijah and Elisha. But meanwhile, Haziah, Elijah did predict everything and it came true. He was like 10 for 10 on his predictions. Jehoram, he was again from Israel, and he was bad. Are y'all seeing a theme in Israel? So far we're no good and all bad. So he is the brother of Haziah and reigns in Israel after Haziah dies. He is evil, but not as bad as Ahab. After Ahab's death, Moab revolted against Israel, but with Elisha's help, a joint force of Israel, Judah, and Edom put down the revolt. Elisha's other exploits included the widow's oil, the Shulamite's son, the poisoned stew, the feeding of the 100, and healing of Naaman, and the floating axe head and the blinding of the Arameans. The Arameans returned to besiege Samaria at the height of the famine. 4 lepers discovered that the Aramean camp had been deserted in accordance with Elisha's prophecy. Jehoram was also Judah. And so Edom's successful revolt against Judah, he marries Ahab's daughter and is wicked. He apparently co-reigns with his father Jehoshaphat for part of his reign. When Jehoshaphat died, he slew all his brethren, and Elijah prophesies against him. So they were connected for a minute, and then they're back to being separate. And then Ahaziah, which is, he also is from Judah. And with the help of Joram, king of Israel, he fought against Hazael, king of Aram. And when Joram is wounded, he goes to visit him, and he is killed by Jehu. He was bad. And then we see Jehu, because Jehu just killed Ahaziah, and he is Israel, and he's bad. Elijah has been told by God to anoint Jehu king over Israel, but he had passed the responsibility onto Elisha, who in turn passed it on to an unnamed man from the company of prophets. As soon as he'd been anointed, the army proclaimed him king, and he embarked on a program of wholesale slaughter. First, he killed King Joram of Israel, then King Ahaziah of Judah, then Jezebel, the queen mother, then all 70 of Ahab's descendants in accordance with Elijah's prophecy, then some relatives of Ahaziah, and finally all the prophets of Baal. But although he purified Israel to some extent, he did not discontinue the worship of the golden calves, which is why he was still bad. He was, to me, like one of those kings, like he loved country, but he didn't love God, but he wanted to do right. And so it was like he did good things, but he was not guided by God. He was guided by country. And so we have to always make sure we separate. We love our country, but we make sure that we don't love our country over God. And that's where his mistake was. He loved his country over God, even though he wanted to do right and he still did good. He was kind of like his love was more for country than was for God. So he didn't really get rid of the golden calves, because he was just like, I don't really care, because I really just want my country to be good. And so it was just more like, again, he's like total I guess it would be a patriot, I guess is what they call that. But he was not I mean, he I think he wanted to do well, but he just missed the mark on that one. And then, and again, I can say this looking like it's so easy for me to say all this, because, it's like Ruth had said, they're men and we can look at them, but we also have to point at ourselves and we have to kind of see, do we do that? And again, that was hard for me because every time I would come back into our country, I really do appreciate our country. It has its faults, but we do live in a good country. And so it is like, even though our faults, it's like, I don't want to love my country more than I love God. Even to the point, like, me and my husband have talked about one day being full-time missionaries in another country, because that is something that we would have a desire to do. And so I don't know what God would have in store for that, but we'll see. But I want to always put God first and foremost on that. Athaliah, and he reigned for 7 years and he was bad and he was from Judah. And Athaliah was a girl, and she was the only female ruler. The mother of Ahaziah, hearing of his death, proclaimed herself queen in his stead and put to death every remaining member of the royal family in order to strengthen her own position. Ahaziah's infant son Joash was hidden by the nurse and lived in the temple for 6 years, thereby preserving David's royal line. She was bad, but God also had a plan. And this to me was like a modern day Moses story at the time, because God separated Joash to be able to keep the lineage going, the royal line of David. And it worked out well because Joash became king whenever I think he was 7. Yeah, he was probably the youngest king. And he was placed on the throne at 7, but he was good. And it is interesting because I wondered where he went for those 7 years. Did he go in the temple? Was he raised by the priest? Is that why he did what was good? Because it says that Jehoiada, the high priest, is a well-planned rebellion against Athaliah. So it makes me think that he was with the high priest and the high priest had raised them. In the early years of his reign, Jehoiada influenced him and he repaired the temple, had the people destroy all the idols of Baal, and slew the priests of Baal. But after Jehoiada's death, Joash ignored God, allowed pagan worship again, and had Jehoiada's son executed. After this, Hazael and the Arameans attacked again, and the Lord delivered a great host of Judah into their hands. Joash appeased them by giving the newly restored temple treasures. Zechariah prophesies against him, so the king has him stoned. Finally, he was assassinated in revenge for the killing of Jehoiada's son. So again, that's just lots of stuff going, like with Joash. I can't say it. That's kind of like what happened with him. And it is unfortunate because again, we have this great ruler, but he did rule for 40 years. So just think of all that 40 years of goodness, all that 40 years of putting God first, of allowing the temple. It's like we see when the good kings happen, the temple gets rebuilt. A lot of good comes, they get lots of riches happening, and they're able to build the temple to be beautiful, and they have all of these riches put into it. And then when the bad kings come, it's like they take all that riches and then they pay off other people to do it. But it's that time of 40 years where Joash is taken here, where he's able to build all that back up because God's blessing on them, because he is putting God first. And so I don't know why these kings aren't realizing the common denominator is God first. It's like, I'm not a bright person, but I'm seeing this. And then Jehoahaz is he is actually from Israel. So Joash was from Judah. And then Joash was bad in response to continuing oppression from Hazael. This godless man turned to God, who heard his cry and delivered Israel when the army was down to its last 10 chariots. And then Joash, another one. Again, we said in the beginning that we have different names. So Joash, that was his main name, but he was known as Joash. And then Joash was known as Joash. So it's like, blah. This is why it's so confusing.
The names drive me nuts. It's like, I need to have a notebook and have a separate page for each person because it's like, there's the name, then there's the name that's one letter extra that sounds like the other name that makes you
Yes.
think that that person did that thing, but no, that person did that thing, but this person's name is this, but then they go by this. So I used to have that happen when I taught, because the kids would have their American name, but then they were so excited because they had a Korean name. So then it became like a whole thing. Well, what do you want me to call you? And then they were confused because they had two names. So it was like this whole thing of, whoa, what's your name? What did you do?
Yeah. Was it weird? Because like in Thailand, they would name themselves. Like we had a guy that my husband, because he did English as a second language at the college, and he was like, they would rename themselves like Arm. And like so one of the guys' name was Arm, and he was like, you know what that means? And he's like, yeah. So they but it was easy to pronounce with their language, like with their speech,
Right.
Because they can't pronounce some of our letters.
Well, because they don't exist in their language, or the
Exactly.
pronunciation doesn't exist. Like, it's like, that's the part that was kind of funny, not funny. Well, I think it was sweet. All the kids had names out of the Bible. Their
Nice.
American names always out of the Bible. So you have 7 Davids, and you have 8 Abrahams, and and it's all like they would pick the favorite name. And so then it had become David A, David C, David L, David.
So did you have
And
any
then heaven forbid,
Nebuchadnezzar?
if they had someone of the same last letter name, then it became, okay, what shall we call you?
Did you have any Nebuchadnezzars?
No, but I think that you need to each have your own special name at home. So I think that would be rad, just because then you could call each other that. And if you had guests over, it'd be even better, because they'd be like, who are you talking to?
Yeah, that would be. We get enough with having the same name. We get enough of that. Like we get.
I bet.
You have no idea how many jokes and how many times people have asked Faith, oh, is your name Shannon too? I was like, Faith, if you had $1 for every time, you would be a millionaire. Like, I seriously think so, because every time we introduce ourselves and they look at Faith and they say that, it never fails. It's like, and then she just looks at us like, it's like, yep.
Man.
So if y'all didn't know, I don't know if you're new, like me and my husband have the same name. So we're both Shannon. So I don't know if y'all knew that or not. So it's an ongoing joke. And we can always tell if people are paying attention to us when we introduce ourselves. So we
And
have
hilariously, you're both Shannon McCaig. That's even better.
Yeah. And it's spelled the same, because everyone's like, is it spelled the same? Yeah, it's spelled the same. Because it was like Shannon Doherty, who was En, and we're still On. So okay, so we're getting there, y'all. We're getting there. Amaziah, again, the names. He is from Judah, and he is good. He executed the conspirators responsible for his father's death, but not their children. He does that which is right in the Lord's sight, yet the high places remain. He smites Edom, but then he takes their gods and sets them up to be his gods. So God punishes him. Amaziah challenges resurgent Israel to a completely unnecessary war and loses, resulting in substantial damage in Israel. Later, Amaziah is conspired against and slain. He's still good because he repented as well. So if I remember that story right. And then Jeroboam the second, which I'm glad they say the second, he's from Israel. And of course he's from Israel, so he's bad. He's mostly harmless, and he recovers Damascus and Hamath from Judah for Israel. So he's harmless, but not good either. So Uzziah, Azariah, and he is from Judah because he is good. Basically I'll just kind of go ahead and tell you, all Israel had 100% bad. Every single one of their kings were bad. So just so you know, they're all bad, which is really sad. So if I say good, then you should just automatically know they're Judah. So that can be a easy and a way to also associate Judah versus Israel. Whenever you see them, when you're reading about them, is you'll always see good Judah. Bad is, and it's kind of sad, but it is what it is. And Uzziah reigned for 52 years, and he was good. So again, he has a long reign, and he's good. We saw the other long reign was 40 years, and he was good. So again, that it's allowing God to bless them and help them. Amaziah was good, and he reigned for 29 years, but then again, there was some bad ones that reigned for a long time too. So Zechariah, not the prophet, was from Israel because he's bad. and killed by Shulam after 6 months. And he does evil in that 6-month reign. And then Shalem, which he has the second shortest term, which was 1 month, and he was bad, killed by Menahem, and he killed Zechariah. So yeah, he was bad. And then Menahem, and he reigned for 10 years, and he was bad, and he ruled in Samaria, and he was from also Israel. And Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria invaded the land, but Menahem bribed to withdraw him 37 tons of silver raised via emergency taxation, and he killed Shalom. Again, Israel never has a good king, so I don't understand how they always have things other than they're taxing their people and they're stealing from other people whenever they go in and invade and everything. And then Pekahiah, he reigned for 2 years, and he was bad, and he was killed by Pekah, and then Pekah reigns for 20 years because he took over. And Tiglath-Pileser returned, this time conquering large portions of Israel's territory and deporting many people to Assyria. Pekah was killed by Hoshea. And then we're going to shift back to Judah, and then Jotham, which was good. He reigned for 16 years, and he had some conflicts with both Israel and Aram, and he does right, though the high places still are not removed. Okay, and then Ahaz takes over after Jotham and Judah, and he's bad. 732 BC, fall of Damascus, the capital of Aram, to Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria. Under military pressure from the Israel-Aram alliance, Ahaz sent the gold and silver from the temple to Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, asking for his aid, which came in form of Assyria's conquering Damascus. This marked the effective end of Aram as a threat to Israel and Judah, but Assyria was at least as threatening in replacement. He sacrifices his children to pagan gods, so as punishment, he besieged by Pekah and League of Rezin, king of Assyria. He's the first person that is noted in these notes that have sacrificed their children to pagan gods. I feel like after this, it's going to keep on going, and it's really terrible. And it's just heart-wrenching to know that they did this. And then Israel, we see Hoshea, which was bad, end of northern kingdom in 722, fall of Samaria and Shalmaneser of Israel. Hoshea was the last king of Israel. At this point, Israel was subject to Assyria, but Hoshea rebelled by sending envoys to Egypt and refusing to pay tribute to Assyria. As a result, Shalmaneser invaded Israel, besieged Samaria for 3 years, conquered it, and imprisoned Hoshea, exiling the Israelites to Assyria and resetting Samaria. So that's the end of Israel. So the reign, of course, we read earlier, wasn't that long, but you just see they had all bad kings. I feel like all bad kings, your reign should end, right? Like, I feel like that should have been, because there's no good kings. So it's like, if they're not going to learn from their lesson, then, God was like, okay, well, we're just going to hand them over to these people. So it was really sad. So now we get to Hezekiah. Okay, I'll be honest. It was hard not to do a lesson on Hezekiah this week, but I really want to wait until the Chronicles to be able to go over it. That's what was hard for me. It was really hard for me not to go over it because I'm so excited about Hezekiah and what he did. He, of course, was good. To me, he's my favorite king, and I love him. And I'm glad he's not really here, because my husband would be really concerned, because every time a sermon is preached on Hezekiah, I'm like, and he's just like, gosh, you're so weird. I love Hezekiah, mainly probably because I read the Lynn Austin book. I can't remember it. I knew I would forget it. And then just reading it, and then going to Israel and seeing all of what he did. And it's amazing what he did. And so you're going to see more of that in First or Second Chronicles. And we're going to see a lot of what he had done. Again, the Kings, what we just read in Second Kings, it wasn't as in depth, because again, that was we need both the Kings and the Chronicles to be able to see the full picture of that. But Ahaz had subjected Judah to Assyria because of the joint threat of Israel and Aram. With the threat gone, Hezekiah tried to reestablish Judah as an independent state. In response, Sennacherib of Assyria invaded Judah. And then Hezekiah tried to appease him with the temple gold, but the Assyrians besieged Jerusalem anyway. Isaiah prophesied that the siege would fail, and that night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 men in the Syria camp. This is the coolest story. And this is he did exactly what the other king didn't. He relied on the Lord and he prayed first. And it's just like, I think what Carmen had said is because he relied on him, all of the people were done. Like God took care of all of them. And they were right outside. And we'll see why it was so cool how he did it whenever I want to tell you, but you're going to have to wait until we read the Chronicles story, because you can be on the edge of your seat and suspense to see what happens, because it's pretty phenomenal what happens in it. And so when Hezekiah falls sick, Isaiah comes to him, tells him he will die. But Hezekiah prays to God, who says through Isaiah, I have heard thy prayer. I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee. And then Hezekiah asked for a sign that he would be healed, and that shadow returned backward 10 degrees, and he lives a further 15 years, but in the time fathered Manasseh. So Hezekiah did not have any kids. And then because he had that extra 15 years, Hezekiah has Manasseh in that time. And and of course Manasseh, who was the one, he lives a further 15 years, but at the time fathered Manasseh, who was to be one of the very worst kings in Judah, for sure. And then Hezekiah also sowed the seeds of Judah's final fate by entertaining Babylon envoys and showing them the treasury. And he initiates a revival, takes down the high places, and invites both Judah and Israel to the Passover. Isaiah tells him that God will allow Babylon to carry Judah away in exile after Hezekiah's days. Because basically Hezekiah gave away all of their strategies. That's basically what he did out of pride. So as much as I love Hezekiah, he has his downfalls, but don't we all? Especially pride. So so in that, I think it just shows that as much as he is a man after God's own heart, just like David, he still had his faults. Katie, it is the Chronicles of the King series. That's it. And it's really good. And then Manasseh, we see again, like I just said, he was probably one of the worst kings ever. He rebuilds altars to Baal, sheds much innocent blood, sacrifices his own children, and other evils. His grandfather Hezekiah's dad also sacrificed. That's the one. So we have Ahaz, which sacrifices children to pagan gods. But that's the thing about reading that book. It made me think is because he did that, Hezekiah was king. If he didn't do that, Hezekiah may not have been king. I don't know. I don't know that thing, but that was kind of an interesting take of that. Because he was spared, and he was spared for the good because he was a good king, and he reigned for 29 years. Manasseh, unfortunately, reigned for 55 years, which is just crazy to me, that the evilness that he had. He desecrated the temple so badly that the prophets proclaimed him worse than the Amorites, whom the Israelites had originally driven out of the land. Manasseh is bound and carried into Babylon, but there he prays to God, and God sees that, and he is brought back to Jerusalem. Then he takes away the idols and repairs the Lord's altar. So he is bad. He comes back to God, but in the meanwhile, he is known to have sawed Isaiah the prophet in two. So he was very evil. And I'm so mad that he killed Isaiah, because Isaiah was awesome. And so it just tells you his evilness and how bad he was. And then Amon, he reigned for 2 years, and such an evil king that his servants slay him in his own house. But the people slay the conspirators and make his son Josiah king. And finally, we have Josiah. Josiah, he's a great one. He's good. He's a kid, and he takes over at 8 years old. So he's the second youngest. And he is good. Nineveh falls to Babylon in accordance with Nahum's prophecy. And so Josiah is the last good king, only 8 years old at the start of his reign. At the age of 26, he instigated repairs for the temple, in the course of which the book of the law was rediscovered, precipitating a reformation of the covenant and wide range reforms. The Assyrian Empire was crumbling, and the Egyptians marched through Judah to aim the remaining Assyrians against the Babylonians. Josiah insisted on fighting the Egyptians against Pharaoh's will, and was killed in battle, contemporary with Jeremiah. So we're going to see a lot of this in the prophets, and we're seeing the stories, but we're going to see the backstories when we get to the prophets later on in the year. So this is kind of really cool because it's like tells you how the Bible all comes together, and it's so good. And we see it's like we're reading the stories, but we're seeing the behind the scenes. You know how sometimes when you watch a movie and then at the end of the movie, they show the behind the scenes and they show like things that could happen. That's basically what the prophets is, the book of the prophets. We're going to see the behind the scenes of it, but right now we're just kind of seeing the surface of it, which is really cool. Okay, so Jehoahaz, again, we're going to see the rest are bad. They're all Judah, so the rest are bad. So Josiah was the last good king, and he reigned for only 3 months before the Egyptians, having invaded the wake of Josiah's death, deported him, replacing him with his brother Eliakim, who then renamed Jehoahaz. I personally liked his other name better, but whatever. And then Jehoiakim, Eliakim, again, like Stacey said, these names, oh my goodness, they were bad, or he was bad, and he was 605 BC, first Babylonian invasion. His reign was set up by Pharaoh. During his reign, Babylon wiped out the Egyptian empire, taking over most of its subject states, including Judah. When Jehoiakim rebelled against Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, attacked the conquered Jerusalem, imprisoning Jehoiakim and taking hostages, including Daniel and his friends, to Babylon. So this is where Daniel comes in. So Daniel is from Judah. We knew that. And because of this happening, this is where Daniel comes in. So we see that the Jehoahaz reigned for 3 months was bad, but Daniel, whenever we read about Daniel, we have to remember he was raised in Josiah's reign, mainly. That's how he is such a strong believer. He was raised in a kingdom of goodness. And so he sees that. He probably saw that, or at least it was fresh enough that he knew it, because we don't really know how old Daniel was. And Jehoiakim did reign for 11 years. But remember, Josiah did for 31. So a lot of the people, Daniel's parents at least, were under Josiah. And so from that, he was raised in that mindset and that family. So we see the goodness, and that's how Daniel turned out the way he did. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then Jehoiachin, which was bad. 597 BC, second Babylonian invasion. Nebuchadnezzar invades again, plunders the temple, and carries Jerusalem into exile. Many Jews, including Ezekiel, exiled to Babylon. So here we see the prophet Ezekiel coming in. And then Jehoiachin was deported to Babylon, but is later released from prison and treated well by evil Merodach. His uncle Mattaniah was made king in his place, and Mattaniah's name was changed to Zedekiah. Zedekiah is so much better. That just rolls. Zedekiah was bad, and the end of the southern kingdom. So here we have it, y'all. In 586, final fall of Jerusalem of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Subsequent invasion of remains of Edom. Zedekiah, learning little from his predecessor and nothing from the prophet Jeremiah, rebelled against Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar slays Zedekiah's sons before his eyes. That had to be horrific. Puts out his eyes and burns the temple. That is so evil and horrible. The end result was the total destruction of Jerusalem, and deported all of the remaining people except for some of the very protests who were left behind the work of the land. So again, we have to think here that Daniel had only been in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Let's see here. 3 months Jehoiakim, and then Zedekiah 11 years. I don't know where Daniel kind of comes in with this at this point. But what Nebuchadnezzar did was terrible, but we don't know when Nebuchadnezzar to this point surrendered to the Lord, because I would think that he wouldn't by now because of the evilness that he did. What he did to Zedekiah was really bad. I couldn't imagine that. And then burning the temple is the thing that I think I just can't imagine him being. I mean, Daniel had a very big influence, but I don't know where this comes in with the lion's den and all that. So I don't know if this was helpful. I don't know if that helped y'all at all, but to me, it is interesting. Because again, like we said earlier, we see all of the kings, we see that God told them to begin with, you don't want this. And now we're seeing why. We're seeing why he didn't. Like, you see all the bloodshed that should not have happened. And we see all of the things all of the evilness of how the bad so outweighs the good. I think it was 67% of bad in Judah and only 33% of good. So out of Judah and Israel, only like 33% of one. That would be like what, 16% or something. I don't know. I'm not a mathematician. My husband is. But it just shows that God knows what we don't. And that goes back to the trusting in him. And God knows what we don't know. And so again, the saying all the time of God would answer your prayers, or you would answer your prayers the way God does if you knew what God knew. God already went before all these kings. He knew all that was going to happen. And yet he warned them, but he still gave them over to that. And sometimes we are giving over to our evil desires. And in that we have the sin, and then we have consequences to that. And we're seeing the consequences. And we also see the importance of leaders and how leaders can make or break a country. And that is important too. And so we're seeing a lot, and we can learn so much in the Kings. And that's why I know it's hard to read. And I want to encourage y'all to not give up reading, especially through 1st and 2nd Chronicles. That's like I think my whole goal of this is to encourage y'all to not give up. I mean, this is written here for us to learn. And I feel like we do learn a lot from them. We're learning a lot of what not to be and what to be. And we're learning a lot from their mistakes. And we're learning that they are human, but we're also learning that God is God and he is sovereign and he is over everything. And so I know the readings can be hard. Somebody had messaged me and said they were really struggling with reading and just wanting to kind of give up on it, but they're trying to persevere, and the group really does help. And I'm so appreciative of y'all whenever you comment and just really encourage other people, because I do think it's just so important to stay in God's word. And I know some of it's hard. I mean, if I were a king, I would sleep with the one eye open, because it's like, you never know when another one's coming to kill you, And so it's like, it really is that hardship of seeing, but this is what sin does. And I think if anything, we can learn sin destroys us, and sin can destroy others around us if we allow it to. And so being on guard and making sure we're in God's word. You don't have to do the reading that we do every day, but just being in God's word every day is more important than anything, and making sure to stay in his word. So just an encouragement. I know it's hard, but I do think that it's worth it in the end, and staying strong in his word and not giving up. At the end of the year, you're gonna be really excited. It's gonna be like so awesome. You're gonna feel so great. But I know it is hard. You're gonna get through some names next week, which I found refreshing, because I was like, at least people aren't killing people. We're good. I'm reading about these and everything. So it's not gonna be as hard next week, because to me, it was hard doing it in the Kings and 2nd Kings, because having to look up 1st Chronicles and 2nd Chronicles and seeing the history of everything, it took a long time to do it. But I feel like 1st Chronicles and 2nd Chronicles is not going to be as hard as 1st and 2nd Kings, but just remember what we can learn from it. So I'm done talking. Y'all have at it amongst yourselves.
What I got out of it is how much we all need to pray for our leaders and politicians, and it, just to keep them in our prayers.
Yes.
She made a good point earlier that they're human, and I think that's part of what everybody forgets, is they hold them up on this pedestal like they are God. They are not God. They are in an authoritative position. However, they are not God.
Yep. Yeah, and that goes currently too. It's the same thing.
What I found interesting is I remembered back in 1 Samuel 8, where he was talking about, like, if I give you kings, this is what's going to happen. And one that I have a specific example for is where he says, he will take your best fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his couriers. But where's the name? Sorry. Ahab and Jezebel murder Naboth for his vineyard, right? And I just thought that was, it's just, he's telling them, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And I think that's why Israel is all evil, because he was right. He knew, because he knew what was going to happen, that's what it would be like. And then I was looking up how many of David's lineage was in Judah as in power, because it sounded like you said not all of them were of his lineage. But I think that's why, if there's any good, it's in Judah, because he had even said, I'll set this apart so that his family line can stay as rulers, because that was a promise he had given David. So again, I just thought that that was really interesting, and I just kind of kept going back to that as you were reading and as I'm reading. So
Yeah, very good. Very good points.
Smite. Okay, you talked about smite. I've never understood it. So I looked it up. Then I regretted looking it up because it has two meanings. It either means to strike with a firm blow or be strongly attracted to someone or something. So those are both ends of the spectrum. So either you're hitting them with your sword or you're hugging them around their neck.
Is that where smitten comes from?
Yes. Yes.
They're smitten by him.
And I thought that was like, I'm assuming they're going with definition number one and not, oh, smite you. But
I
was just
forgot to say, I posted a picture in here. Did it come through? It says it did. But it's basically just a picture of what you had said. It's got the
oh, you have to download
prophet,
it.
the period, the prophets, the kings of both Israel and Judah, the Assyrian kings, Babylonian and Persian kings. So
Very cool. Can you share that in the, whenever I put the YouTube up on
Yeah.
it? Okay, thanks. And I can share these notes too, if anybody wants them.
yeah, I just thought this was cool because it just breaks it down to like a picture.
Yeah, yeah. That will be good, especially visually.
I just kept thinking about, as you were talking about all the kings and the good and the bad and whatever, about how way back in Moses' time that God had said that if there was ever a king, that they should keep the law with it, like copy it in their own hand and keep it with them all the time and read it every day. And just what a difference that could have made had they made a copy of the law in their own hand and kept it with them and read it every day.
Yeah, and that's why Josiah's reign is so weird to me, because Josiah, they found the law and they were like, whoa, what is this? It's like they were so far away from God that they didn't even know his law, which that didn't happen, Katie. They didn't do what God said again. And so that's what it was like. They were so far away that, but then that was Manasseh, and that's so weird because then Hezekiah was so like loved the Lord and had Isaiah, hello. And it's just like, it's dumbfounding to me. But again, we live in a country that we have had the Bible and here and everything. There are other countries who've never heard the word of God and never have had that. But I feel like God's law is implanted in us. And it's in our DNA. And so I think, you hear of missionaries going to other countries and they're like, they'll tell them about Jesus and they're like, that's who we've been waiting to hear about, because we've been wanting to know who it is, but we knew somebody, that there was something, and now we know the name. And so it's like, it's just so cool when you hear those stories. It's encouraging. Very cool how I think we have that DNA in us, but again, they were so far away. And they didn't take that verse to light, I guess.
It's a memorization tool when you write stuff down. That helps it imprint into your brain.
Yeah.
Facts for you today.
Well, it's interesting because every time they would write God's name down, they had to start with a new pen, because they said nothing could ever follow God after writing God's name. Nothing could ever follow his name because he is holy. And so that tells you the reverence of God. And so imagine how many pens they had to go through.
They even had to dip it in new ink too. And then they had to bathe, put on new clothes. And then if the king summoned them, or if the king came in the room, the king had to be stopped so they could finish writing out the word God. It was great. We just studied all this in school. That's how I knew about it. But it is crazy what they had to go through. That they were.
Yeah, the reverence. That is what's missing right now. I feel like with God is there's no reverence. I feel like we have made hippie Jesus, and we have not seen that he is the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, and we have not revered him. He is on his throne and he deserves our respect and honor. And we've kind of, again, I've said that many times. It's that reverence. I guess, like Ruth said, that's something that we should pray for. I'm terrible at, is to revere the Lord more. To not
Like
put
you
it down.
just said, other countries don't know him at all, yet we know him here and he's ignored by the majority of the populace. That just blows my mind.
Yeah. So sad. It's so sad.
Do you think like during this time when they didn't have the law and so the priest, the Levites aren't teaching it to the congregation, to the Israelites, northern kingdom, southern kingdoms. They're not, the people aren't learning. And so they're seeing the king, direct them. And, it's like, you're thinking, I would never have liked to have lived in the northern kingdom because all those kings were bad. And yet, the people there, are they doing bad in the eyes of the Lord because they don't know better, or because evil is just, showering down on them generation after generation? And, at some point, it's like the kings, yes, they're going to have a lot of the responsibility of having not taught the people below them. But you're thinking like some of the people towards the end, like in Menahem's day or whatever, towards the bottom, those people were so far removed from even knowing, what they were supposed to do, from even knowing that, how they were supposed to worship, or, the sacrifices they were supposed to make, or offerings they're supposed to give. How, I guess I just wonder about, sometimes it says that the king did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And then there was a time, I know it said that Judah did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so they're encompassing the whole person, the whole, everybody. But, it's just interesting, I mean, without a foundation, how do these people, I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey, but it's like, yeah, but then again, there's probably where you see the compassion by God to try and get them out, and remind them or whatever. But it's like, yeah, without some kind of foundation, and I guess that's a lesson for us to know, is that we need to give the next generation a foundation. And maybe that's the lesson, because you stop and think of all these generations of not knowing the law, not knowing what they were supposed to know. And it just, clearly it didn't work out for them. And we will fall into that same trap if we don't take care of the next generation. I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, that is good. It is definitely some, and again,
Exactly
that is, it's a reminder of how important it is to mentor and pour into the next generation. It's so important for us to do that. I mean, imagine if every one of us poured into a younger person. Imagine that effect of them pouring into somebody else, and then it's that domino effect, and that's how God created us to be. But somehow we come too busy. We don't have time. We don't have anything to give. That's not true. We can make all the excuses in the world, but you're just limiting God, basically. And so that's why it's so important, no matter what your age is. We had a HPRC banquet, I think 2 weeks ago, and I had mentioned that. And that's what the guy had said. He was in his 20s, total millennial. And he was like, you 60, 70-year-olds, you say, oh, I can't mentor because I can't relate to them. And he's like, yeah, you can't relate to me, but you know what? You have a lot to tell me and you have a lot to pour into me. So why are you limiting yourself? Because we want to hear what you have to say, but yeah, you're not gonna be able to relate to us. So stop making that as an excuse. And I was like, yes, that is so true. It's so true. So it's something that really to pray about and everything. So, okay, I'm going to end, but I have 2 questions. Katie, how is your dad's house sale going and moving going?
My sister is going to be there again today. The house cleaners came. Yay. we got that hit. So Thursday we were able to get to that point, but it also involves like putting off some decisions and moving some stuff into the garage. So more days. But I've been fighting allergies so much this week and stuff that I'm not going to be able to go tomorrow when she's there and help out. And so I feel really bad about that, but especially since it's her birthday, as she's cleaning up my dad's house. But we're getting closer to being able to list at least. Hopefully we'll be able to list by this weekend and get that moving. So
Good time.
Yeah.
And then Deliska, how is your neighbors doing? You have to unmute.
They are maintaining. It's I mean, it's a sad thing, but they're hanging in there.
Okay. Yeah, my heart has been so heavy praying for them and you this week. I don't know if y'all saw that in prayer request, but her neighbor was 18 and she drowned. And so I could not imagine. And so definitely been praying and heavy hearted for them.
Thank you.
I know it's hard. And we also have a couple in our Sunday school class, and they have a foster child, and she is 14 and she ran away this week. Thankfully, she came back. But if you can just be praying for them. My mind, of course, goes to trafficking, because if she's online, that is trafficking, is the avatar is foster kids. And so I'm just really heavy hearted over that too. And just kind of praying, like right now I texted her and asked if we could talk to her, if she needed me to talk to her about trafficking and the stats of that, and just kind of sitting alongside of her. And she said, not right now, but she did see the heart, what she did was wrong, which is awesome. And she is repentant of it. I shouldn't say repentant, like, but that's basically how it is. She sees that she's done wrong. She wants to do better. So if you can just be praying for her, that would be amazing. Because man, she's with the most amazing family. They are just awesome. And so God just really put her in the home to be in, because I cannot say enough about this couple. They love the Lord. They just are kind. They are just amazing people. And so I just think, man, God has just given such a good family for this sweet girl. And she's the sweetest girl. I mean, like, she's like one of those girls you just want to be around, because she's just sweet. That's why it's like, okay, Lord, just please protect her. Because she is so precious. So, if you can just be praying for that situation, that would be great. Does anybody want to pray us out? Y'all, I've talked so much. Please, somebody pray us out. Katie's getting volunteered again.
Here he goes again. All right. God, I thank you we can come together, and I thank you that you have left us so many examples to learn from in the Bible. I pray that you would help Deliska's neighbors, that the burden of grief can just be so hard, and it's such a journey, and it's one that you just don't ever get past. You just cope better with it. And I just pray that you would send your grace and mercy and healing to them. I thank you for all the progress on my dad's house, that you would just continue to help us to push through and do what we need to do. I pray for my health this week. It's been really bad. I just pray for everything else going on in everybody's lives, and Vale's struggles and Abby's struggles, and for Sue. And I just pray that you would, and everybody that I just don't know their requests, that you would just work there and help us to have a good week, help us to continue to persevere and read your word, and just not beat ourselves up with imperfections, but just to keep going. And I give us a good week. In your name I pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Y'all have a good week. Next week, we'll go back to normal lesson. So more interaction for sure.
This was fun though. This was good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I just don't like hearing my voice that long. So, but
Well, we love it. So more of it. We're here for it.
Every once in a while, I think it's good though, because it is, to me, that's just interesting stuff. So it's kind of like condensed into what we just learned the past month. So Y'all have a good week. We're continuing to pray. Please keep us posted in the prayer request on Fridays so we know how to pray for everyone. So have a good week.